Hello, this is Rock Our World with Neil Buchanan. This is episode 114, and this is a project our small church, our small home study group generated. And so I'll tell you a little bit of a story, a lead up to what I'm going to do. I'm going to tackle three scriptures in particular, but I'll fill you in the story up to that point. Our newest member, you might call her. She's been part of the group for a long time, but now she's with us a lot of the time. She's closer to home, one of our daughters, and she had her wedding here very recently this summer, and all five of us were, of course, at this wedding, her and her husband and relatives. And in the course of the weekend, one of the other relatives, actually a sister-in-law, we all of us talked to her various times and got into conversations, and this lady has a real heart for the Lord. And because of that, we end up discussing things of God and of the scriptures and so on. And anyway, between the four of us, or five of us, we kind of stirred up her concern, because we believe that, just as Jesus said, he said, "I don't think I came to do away with the law." And yet, the vast majority of Christians are taught that Jesus did away with the law, and of course that's a reference to the Torah. It's a poor translation of the word Torah. Torah means teachings and instructions. At any rate, this was on this lady whose concern was stirred up. Her desire to follow the Lord led her to pursue these things, and my guess is she found these three scriptures through talking to perhaps her pastor or other believers that she fellowships with, and they warrant an answer. What do these three scriptures mean? So I'll carry on with some background here, and I've talked a lot about this type of thing for 114 episodes now. That it turns out that what we call the New Testament, I'll call them the apostolic letters or writings, they were written in Aramaic, not Greek. Now the evidence became well known, well available is a better way to put it, 30 years ago, when the Soviet Empire collapsed and the Eastern Orthodox Church had all these documents. And according to this, I'll do a little bit of reading to the introduction of this Bible I've showed you before, or the apostolic writings. It's the Aramaic English New Testament. And Roth, the man Roth, I think his first name is Andrew, but he oversaw the production of compiling this and putting it together. But it's based on 360 manuscripts that were found when the Iron Curtain fell. They were not really found. They were in the libraries of the Eastern Orthodox Church, but because there was a lack of communication in the Cold War, from the east to the west, that it was not very well known that these documents existed. At any rate, these 360 manuscripts are all written in Aramaic, and they all agree with each other. There's no differences between them. They were spread all over the Soviet Empire, and I'm sure there's a few other places. Turkey is suspect, but wherever the Eastern Orthodox Church is, there's remnants of these things, because the Eastern Orthodox Church really was the first Protestant church, if you want to put it that way. They rebelled against the so-called Catholic Church at the time. I've warned people, don't think of the Catholic Church today as what I'm talking about, but at the Council of Nicaea in 331 BC, that was, or ACE, I should say, AD or ACE, the modern church was birthed, and it was what I call the apostate church. It was the fallen church. Uh, what Jesus put in place, Yeshua, 300 years earlier, can be read and examined by reading the 5 documents, the 4 testimonies of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then the testimony of Paul in the book of Acts. That's a snapshot of that church that Jesus or Yeshua created. And it does not look anything like our church today. So why is all this? So now 300 years later, this apostate church had its beginning. Constantine put it all in place, and the doctrines that were put in place at that time, and we follow a lot of those doctrines to this day, but they weren't introduced by Jesus or Yeshua. They were introduced by this apostate church. So now, for 1700 years, the Lord has been restoring all things, and it's a slow process. He's giving us more and more information as time progresses, but now we're to the end of this process. This is the final year, and this is me speaking. I believe this is the final year that we have to make some decisions before the Great Tribulation gets into full swing. I would say it this way: we're already in the tribulation, but we're in the last year of this past Jubilee cycle. And God's giving us this year of grace to catch up to speed. And by the Day of Atonement this coming year, which would, or this year, yes, this coming year, it should be about October 2nd. We'll keep you tuned up as it's the 10th day after the fall equinox is what the Day of Atonement is. And that's the timing and of how God runs things. So anyway, that's the background on these 3 scriptures I'm going to go over, and give people some more insights and strategies of how to access information that God has for us and access what God has restored so far, and why the church today, the Christian church today, teaches what it teaches. Why does it teach that Jesus did away with the law when he clearly stated in Matthew 5:17-19 that he did not do that? And he made the statement, and that was quite clear, and then he went on to make it crystal clear by saying not a single detail of the Torah will change. Heaven and earth will change, but there will be no details changed. And then he made it perfectly crystal clear in a third round. He said, if you break the least commandment of the Torah and teach others to do the same, they will be called least in the kingdom of God. Okay, I showed you this. This, I would say, is the best document to use if you're English. It's not great. I got some beefs about this particular book, but it's still the best we got, and it's translated directly from, or the best they could do, from the original these 360 manuscripts that were found in the Eastern Orthodox Church libraries. And the Greek versions were then created by translating these, and they were not done faithfully. They were some of the people may have been faithful, but they were laboring under some false teachings, and one of them was that Jesus did away with the law. So when they made these Greek translations, they slanted different things. Some of it was slanted honestly, but a lot of it was done dishonestly. And the 300 Greek documents that are available, that we have made most of our translations from, they disagree with each other widely. So here we have 360 documents that in Aramaic that are perfect copies of something. We can use logic to say that was older and accurate, and then these newer translations from the Greek are all disagree with each other. They wide differences, and so then we could use logic to say, well, these are not the originals. These are translations from the Aramaic, and then we went ahead and made English translations out of the Greek. So now we got two translations going on, and there's always going to be mistakes made when you translate from one language to another, especially when you don't have experts available. Now, in today's world, we do have experts, but we haven't made a new translation of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings since the year 2000, and this is the one I recommend for the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, and it is produced by the Jewish Publication Society, the JPS. That was done in the year 2000, and this first one actually is based on translations that were done in the early 1900s. I'm going to read you a little bit of the introduction here. It is common knowledge that Yeshua, or Jesus, and his original followers spoke Hebrew and Aramaic. But up until now, the vast majority of Bible students have only had access to translations and versions of Greek texts. Within the following pages, you will find the most ancient Aramaic texts, which were derived from the, and I might mispronounce this, the Khaburis Codex, one of 360 manuscripts that make up the Eastern Peshitta family. Now, these are terms that probably you aren't familiar with either, but we'll call it this grouping of these documents that we found behind the Iron Curtain in the Eastern Orthodox Church. A previous critical edition consisting of a vast group of Eastern and later Western texts were compiled into a unified whole and published in 1920. However, in many cases, it gave much weight to later readings. Therefore, earlier and more original readings have been restored now. Our English translation is as literal as possible to the Aramaic, and it's talking about this one I've showed you. Each Aramaic term in Greek, I'm not going to read that. Get a hold of this. You can get it on Amazon. Get a hold of it and get rolling, because well, I'll go over these three scriptures, give you a start. I'll skip down here in the introduction to the last paragraph. This translation was completed on the strength of overwhelming requests for a literal translation of Aramaic to English. As the demand increased, so has ongoing critical analysis and discussion of the text by scholars too numerous to mention. I should throw in this was first put together, I think, in 2006-8, the first edition. So now we're to the fourth or fifth edition, so they keep adding things, as people demand and research and ask for explanations and so on. So the demand keeps increasing. This community of people demanding this or asking for it is collectively produced many excellent resources from which to draw. The task was to unify the language, style, and approach, cross-checking every component with ancient Hebrew and Aramaic. Among the Aramaic scholars involved, there is a common expression that the page should be as blank as possible and devoid of all other influences in order to translate. Make it as simple as possible. Don't get too complicated in trying to... We need it simple, right, to be able to understand. So, now, I better speed up here. I'm at 14 minutes. This dear lady in question who had these very sincere questions, how do you explain these three scriptures? So, I should give you more of this story. So then, 4 days ago, it was whenever Sunday was, we visited a Baptist church, and the pastor we know, and he had given his testimony on the Good News program. If you want to look that up, the Full Gospel Businessman in Canada, you can go on their website and listen to his testimony. But he's a young, dynamic pastor, and he's teaching that we should be reading the the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, and the apostolic writings. And we need to be figuring out why these inconsistencies are there. Anyway, we did this visit, and then we had just a visit after, and this our newest young gal that just got married in this story, she her sister-in-law was in contact with her, and her sister-in-law really wanted these 3 scriptures answered. What do these mean? Why do they seem to contradict what Jesus said? And why, if I go to my pastor or other members, why do they give me these 3 scriptures, and then when I look them up, they don't make sense compared to what Yeshua said? So what happened on Sunday, I didn't have these two books with me, this Torah, Prophets, and Writings, and then the Aramaic translation. So they pulled out every translation they had in the house, and there was 4 or 5 we were working with. The newer King James Version, and an NIV, and the Complete Jewish Bible, and I'm not sure what the other couple might have been, but anyway, we pulled them all out, and they were reading these 3 scriptures, and they all differed from each other. And some of them actually translated them the exact opposite to each other. So obviously there's a problem. Now, if I had my Aramaic, that's where I always go if I want to find what might have been the real answer. And again, we're working with men who do these things, but you know, their hearts are sincere for the most part. They're doing their best to bring the truth out. So, first scripture is Romans 10:4, and I will read it out of this Aramaic translation, the translation that was, they put a lot of effort into making it as accurate and follow into English from what was written by the apostles who wrote the letters. And it says, "For Messiah is the goal of the Torah, for righteousness to everyone that believes in him." Messiah is the goal. Now, in a lot of translations, they make it sound like that Jesus put an end to the Torah. Well, that's not what it's saying. The Torah is the goal. And then there's a footnote, and it says, see 1 Timothy 1:5, and they have a footnote there where they point you to the 18 New Testament misconceptions. So they're trying to answer a whole bunch of, well, in this case, 18 issues that commonly come up when people are trying to sort this out. Why did Jesus say that I did not come to do with the law? He made it very clear it's legitimate, and not just there, I mean all kinds of places. And so how do we tackle these 3 scriptures and others? So anyway, just give you a taste of this Bible. So that's the answer for Romans 10:4. That the Messiah, or Yeshua, Jesus, is the goal of the Torah. Not, he didn't do away with it. That's not what it said. Okay, now we go to Galatians 3:23-25. "For before faith came, Torah was guarding us, while we were confined from the faith about to be revealed. Torah was therefore a tutor to us, going towards the Messiah, that we by faith might be made righteous." So it's saying that the Torah is a tutor. Now this last verse, it changes gears a little bit, and it explains it in a footnote. But since faith came, we are no longer under tutors. And they made a point that it was a plural in the original writings, and the obvious reference was to man-made rules. That is the oral Torah, the Mishnah, the Talmuds, the writings of men. And that's in the Jewish world, and that's what Paul was referring to. That we don't need these rabbis and these, the Sanhedrin, the whole system in the Jewish world. We don't need them explaining to us anymore what this stuff might mean. And of course, when Yeshua was here, he got after them pretty harshly. He was right in their faces that they were not led of God in the things they were doing, and they were teaching the commandments of men. But in the Christian world, we do the same thing. We do not teach truth. The pastors aren't liars, but they teach what they're taught at the Bible schools, and the teachers at the Bible schools were from the Bible schools of the generation before, and it all came from this event, or an event in 331 ACE, the Council of Nicaea, when they created this idea, okay, Jesus did away with the law, that's the lie we want to fly. And then we've had 1700 years to develop all the strategies to make this lie fly. And of course, they never start their dissertation with Matthew 5:17 to 19. They'll use scriptures like these. So anyway, I'll leave that alone. I'll tell you a short story to illustrate the idea of a tutor. A tutor is someone who teaches, okay, to someone that needs to learn, like children. And that's the idea that's being put here. That when we're young, we need a tutor, but when we become adults, that we should be empowered. We should have our own mind and heart and have these things all straightened out so we can walk it out in faith. And none of that means all of a sudden we do something different. We don't stop sending our kids to school because we know everything. No, the tutor is always going to be there for the young. But I'll use this one example. God tells us in the Torah we're not to rape each other. Okay? And in fact, the death penalty is for someone who rapes someone else. And there's 2 credible witnesses, and they are to be stoned to death. Now, the purpose of that was not to stone people. The purpose was to teach our children, and that's what God says. Go back to Deuteronomy, I think 6:4, but read through the early part of Deuteronomy, how we're supposed to teach our children when they go to bed and when they get up. You teach your children. And then they, in turn, when they're adults, they will teach their children. This is what's supposed to go on forever, for every generation. Now, you teach your children that if they rape someone, they'll be stoned to death. I'll tell you, they're never going to let their minds go there. They will be so scared, and that's the purpose of the tutor, to keep us on track until we're old enough to figure this out for ourselves. And the generally accepted idea is that by the time we're 20, we are responsible for what we do and think and say. So by the time you're 20, you should have it figured out that that would be a horrible thing to do. Whereas a kid not told anything can start developing some bad thought patterns and keep going down a wrong road and break some of these rules. So the solution is to have the tutor in place. And again, you don't get rid of the tutor once you graduate because it's still needed for the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren and so on. The tutor's needed up until the time that you become an adult. So anyway, I'll leave that one alone, and then we'll go to this last one, and it's Ephesians 2:15. And it says, "And in his flesh the enmity and regulations of commands contained in his commandments are abolished." Now, it's kind of a mouthful. So that in himself on an occurrence of the divine nature, or it's spelled Qnoma. And there's 2 footnotes here, and I'll read them to you. This Qnoma, and that's Aramaic, means core substance or occurrence. Greek reads self, but Aramaic does not. Self leads to assumptions of personhood, which breeds idolatry. But anyway, that's a little hard to follow, that whole thing. But 22, the footnote, I'll go back 21. What they're actually talking about. The grammatical structure here fully guarantees that the namusa, again, is an Aramaic word, is referring to customs. So this scripture is in their words, guarantees that what the author is talking about is the customs that men have made. So, and again, in that world, it was what was written in the Mishnah and the Talmud, and what is called the Oral Torah, which is a contradiction of terms, because there is only one Torah, and it's found in our Torah, prophets, and writings. It begins in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Anyway, I'm just going to give you a taste of what you can expect when you get this. And you're probably be a little frustrated like I am. They changed the order of the books, so now I don't know where any books are, hardly, because I had the old order memorized, and now, depending on what Bible you pull out, you're not sure where it's going to be. And at any rate, and they put a lot of words in there that came from the Messianic world. They had this habit of transliterating Hebrew words instead of just changing them into English. It's an English translation, so make it English. We're English people. That's what we're after. We're trying to get understanding in the English language. At any rate, it's very good. It will help you a great deal. And another, I don't know, call it a caution, a warning, a heads up. If you pursue these things, and our hope is that you will, you pursue God, you have a heart for God, like this young lady that passed along these requests to understand these three scriptures. When you go down this road, the greatest fear anybody ever has is that you'll be rejected by those you fellowship with, and that is a truth that, in fact, I've gone over this before, but Yeshua predicts in the prophets that 10% will follow this road, and the 9/10 will stick to the old teachings, and so on. And I brought this out before, but I'll see if I can find it real quick. That we're going to pass under the shepherd's rod, and God's going to take us out into the wilderness of people and pass us under the shepherd's rod. And that's a reference to 10% will be separated out that want to follow the Lord. And he says the rest are rebels. That means they don't follow his instructions. That's what a rebel is. And he said, I will never take them into my land. And this is a reference to the last Exodus. And this is all prophetic. And I've covered all these things in my 114 episodes. This is a production of our group, our home church group, or small group. And anyway, that is Ezekiel 20, 30 to 44. You read that. Ezekiel 20, 30 to 44. That is, in a nutshell, what's going to happen during the tribulation. So anyway, that's the heads up that you have to be a brave soul to go down this road, and there's a tremendous reward waiting for you to take that route. Yeshua, when he was here, he told us that when he left, he would send us the Holy Spirit to teach us all things. He did not tell us he would send us men from Bible schools to teach us all things. So everything has its place. Teachers have their place, but they have to be teaching truth. And when we start unraveling this whole thing, we find that Satan is the one that put these lies into the church. Call it an apostate church, but it's still God's church. It's just fallen away. And then he took these last 1700 years and he's restoring all things, but it's a slow process. It's been speeding up in the last 15 to 20 years, and now it's getting really fast. And there's going to be lots and lots of people asking these questions and wanting answers to them. So that's good strategy. Get yourself this Aramaic English New Testament and do some research. There's actually another one available. One of our members found another one that's been released, what do you call it, published. So we're getting more and more choices of how to tackle these questions, and hopefully that was helpful for anyone that's searching for truth, and that you can have an answer instead of sitting around with 5 or 10 different translations and none of them agree with each other. There's obviously something wrong. So those are some answers, and God bless you, and dig in for more. This is Rock Our World.